Hi there. This podcast is going to focus on the pre-classic Maya. These are the earliest Mayan settlements, and essentially, this is the period where the Maya learned how to be Mayan. I'm going to use this timeline throughout the podcast to explain the different periods that existed during the pre-classic era. And we'll start all the way back at the beginning, roughly 2000 BC. This is where our first Mayan settlements date from. And some of our earliest sites were down there along the Pacific coast. Most of them aren't even going to be labeled on maps of the Mayan era. They were never big, super important sites. They were fishing villages, trading fish, other products from the sea, including salt. That was a popular product to trade. Trading inland. And there's some Olmec influence, but really this is the period where the Mayas are just starting to kind of, get going, in effect, building culture, things like that. We say 2000 BC now, but honestly in 5 years, people might be saying 2500 BC. We're constantly making new discoveries about these groups, which is what makes them so exciting, I think, in many ways. So on to the next step, the period from about 1000 BC to 400 BC. And you might already notice this period overlaps with the kind of height of our Olmec era. And this is where the Maya really have a heavy Olmec influence coming in. In many ways, the Olmec taught the Mayans how to be Maya. Things like calendars that were developed by the Olmec, the Mayan calendar, which they're going to take what the Olmec did and kind of move forward with it, but the base for their calendar was taught to them by the Olmec. Other things like math, numbers, the Mayan concept of the zero, many of these things come from the Olmec. What else? Other cultural things. Tlachtli, our Mesoamerican ball game. The Olmec were the ones to invent this game. And the Mayans, they absolutely loved this game. It was in most of their cities. Other things that have to do with Olmec culture that we see in Mayan cities, the jaguar, gods, the feathered serpent that the Olmec worshipped. We see his appearance in Mayan religion, in Mayan cultures. And of course, things like obsidian and jade, these stones that were important to the Olmec for kind of ceremonial, but also very practical purposes. The Mayans are going to use things like this as well. So our next period lasts from about 400 BC to 100 AD, and this is our period where we get strong city-states. Remember, there was never a Mayan empire. You just had strong city-states that were culturally Mayan, but that's the only way they were linked. There was never an empire that kind of held them all together. They were individual, independent city-states. And there's no coincidence here that around the time of the Olmec decline, you have the rise of these strong city-states. We are going to talk about two of these city-states in particular, and the first you're kind of looking at right here, Kaminaljuyu. It is back there on the last image. You can see how that one's spelled. It's a tough one. There's not a tremendous amount of this one left. It's kind of like these Olmec sites where we really don't have huge pyramids left. Many things have sank. Some of the pyramids are made of earth. But either way, this was one of the first big pre-classic cities. It had a dense population by about 700 BC. And it's really a key city in this Mayan period from 400 BC to 100 AD. It was a trading hub between the Pacific coast and the southern Yucatan, and its position was strategic. It was sitting on a bed of obsidian, and obsidian, of course, is this key material that's used for weapons, used for jewelry, used for ceremonies, etc. So they traded a lot of obsidian with others. It had large pyramids, but today we don't see too much of them. Much has sunk, and you see excavation sites like this do a lot to tell us more about this city. Interestingly, one of the things archaeologists and researchers have found at this site at Kaminaljuyu is a clear link to the Olmec. Certain carvings definitely bear resemblance to Olmec carvings, which further reinforces something we started the year out learning, that the Olmec are really the mother civilization for Mesoamerica, that they influenced all of those who came after them, Teotihuacan, the Maya, and later we're going to see the Aztec as well. The second pre-classic city that I want to mention is El Mirador. And here you see a modern look at the city, and you can tell this place had big pyramids. It was a big ceremonial center, And also, a lot of people lived here, maybe 50 to 100,000. And probably now we're starting to think that it was closer to the top end of that number. This place was linked to many, many smaller cities, and it too, like Kaminaljuhu, was a trading hub. And here you can see kind of an artist's conceptualization of what it may have looked like, or really, I think we can say probably confidently what it probably looked like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, actually over 2,000 years ago. And this is not some kind of Santa's Mayan village there or anything. That's not snow. It's actually a white stucco, kind of a plaster that they would make out of pulp from trees, crushed limestone, and water. And this stuff is pretty important. It kind of has two reasons of importance, really, for us. The first reason is that it just kind of shows the Mayans really cared about how their cities look. This plaster, this stucco, it was really for aesthetic purposes. They thought it looked nice. They wanted their temples to be this gleaming, shimmering white. The second reason is more important. It took a lot of trees to make this stuff. There's a common stereotype about indigenous people, and I think it's pretty prevalent in the US, that they kind of lived in perfect balance with their environment. You always heard the saying kind of, if an indigenous person killed a deer, they used the entire deer. And while that may be true, the Mayans were absolutely not living in balance with their environment. They were pretty much deforesting the Yucatan at an alarming rate. To cover one temple with that stucco, it would take enough wood pulp to really have an entire forest. They were basically cutting down forests to make their temples look nice. So deforestation is a real problem for the Mayas. Their lands became less productive, and really, this is one of the reasons why people kind of think Mayan civilization collapsed. Environmental degradation, problems related to deforestation, and that had a lot to do with just kind of them wanting their temples to look pretty, to look nice, to be this glimmering white. And just like our cities today, the way in which Mirador and Kaminaljuhu were linked to other Mayan cities was through roads. And they're a good topic to bring up now because roads were actually called whiteways for the Mayans, and or one of the names that they were called. And this is because they were covered in that stucco. They were that same glimmering white. And the roads were important to the Mayan world. These were how kind of trade was carried out along these lines. Commerce flowed along Mayan roads, just like commerce flows down our roads today. But in some ways, these roads were part of the problem for the Maya. It took a lot of stucco to cover these roads, so their construction contributed further to this environmental degradation. Either way, as these pictures show, you can go to Mexico today and Guatemala, other places, and see the remains of these ancient roads that the Mayans built over 2,000 years ago. So what happened to the pre-classic Maya? The truth is, we really don't completely know. There's theories, but there's also a lot of mystery surrounding why the Mayan world went through this decline. Really, the first decline, first of three declines, because we do have three distinct periods of Mayan development: the pre-classic, the classic, and the post-classic. And each period has a distinct end. Some theories revolve around war. It seems that Mirador built some big walls kind of towards the end of the pre-classic period. Also, bigger projects like temples stopped. So clearly there were problems, maybe issues with trade, food supplies. Either way, something happened that prompted a kind of regional demise of political power in these cities. And so around 250 AD, our era of the pre-classic Maya draws to a close.